Okay, reading more of this book by Manly Palmer Hall. Okay, this is again, this is on the subject of went into the Knights Templars, and then it went into the Charlemagne, and just a lot of stuff here. A lot to learn, and so just want to make sure I'm in the right place here. You know, we're on the subject of the troubadours. That's spelled, you know, trub, like trouble, and the rest of it is A-D-O-U-R-S. Troubadours. And I was, as we were reading, you'll notice Manly P. Hall is giving hints that these ancient societies and these organizations were socialistic and collectivist by nature, you know, that they were pretty much the foundation. They kind of helped lay the foundation for the socialist and collectivist movements that would, you know, manifest in the future, whatever. So, okay, so now we're on the troubadours. Page 44. The earlier orders of chivalry practiced 3 degrees or grades of initiation. Candidates first became pages, then squires, and finally knights. After the mingling of the old military fraternities with such mystical sects as the Albigenses and the Ghibellines, the number of degrees was increased. In some groups, there were as many as 33 grades, somewhat similar to the structure of modern Freemasonry. The romances of the Round Table, the Holy Grail, and the Circle of Charlemagne certainly originated in the esoteric teachings of the Nordic, Gothic, and Celtic rites. Such legends as those of Parzival, King of the Grail, and the Swan Knight Lohengrin, his son, are veiled reports of the secret schools of the adepts. Wagner's interpretation of the Grail cycle, though based upon early traditions, was largely colored by his own mystical convictions. As he glorified the orders of chivalry in his Grail operas, so he dignified the guilds, which had the same origin, in his Meistersinger of Nuremberg. The knights initiates of the Brotherhoods of the Quest performed vigils, cultivated visions, and lived by rules and regulations as rigid as any monastic order. They had signs and passwords and were bound together by secret vows and obligations. They were dedicated to the protection of the weak, the preservation of righteous peace, and the perpetuation of certain spiritual and philosophical secrets. When the Inquisition accused the Knights Templars of worshipping demons and practicing obscene and abominable rites, these accusations merely referred to the pagan doctrines held in secret by this order of chivalry. Now, I already read this page. I'm just starting back a little bit to, you know, as kind of a recap. After the destruction of the Templars, the esoteric tradition of Europe disappeared from public view to be restated cautiously in the curious terminology of the alchemists, Kabbalists, Rosicrucians, and even the astrologers. The orders of the Quest gave place to the orders of the Great Work. The elixir of life in the alchemical bottle is identical in meaning with the blood of Christ and the holy chalice. Even the dragons and monsters of the hero myths survived in the hieroglyphical drawings of the alchemistical philosophers. Charlemagne, with his 12 peers, is Odin, the Grand Master of the Draughts, seated in council with the 12 aces in the high and secret palace of Asgard. Alright, that's a funny way of pronouncing it, but that's like the only way I can see. It's, or Asgard. A-S-G-A-R-D. So, I mean, I know it sounds probably funny with how I said it. The brave Lord Roland is Tammuz, Dionysus, Sigurd, Balder, Sir Galahad, and Robin Hood. All these gallant champions of the human cause, these defenders of the weak, these princes of the philosophic empire, these soldiers of spiritual democracy personified the initiates of the mystery schools. The adept is the eternal hero of the world. So, and you'll find a lot of the socialists refer to themselves as defenders of the weak and protectors of the, you know, of the needy. Nothing wrong with being your brother's keeper, but like I said, all these kind of people, often that's used as an excuse to, for a control freak to control people. You can run into many control freaks, and they're really not seeing themselves as so controlling. In their mind, they're trying to protect everything that they see to control, but they don't see it that way. They see it as protecting. They might even lie to themselves that they're protecting their wife, or they're protecting their girlfriend, or whoever they're controlling. But in reality, they're wanting to be in control, so it's only their little world that really matters, and everybody else that's within that world are basically just, to that person, objects of that world that need to be controlled to keep that person's world secure, to keep it the way he or she wants it. That's really the mentality of a control freak. Anyways, so now we're starting on the troubadours. The Manicheans, the Neo-Manicheans, and the post-Manicheans went far afield to find grist for their mill. There was an old Druidic footing under the culture of the Gauls. One of the three branches of the Druid order was known as the Bards. They were the wandering poets and minstrels, the singers of the mysteries, concealing profound spiritual truths under gay songs, stories, fables, and myths. And so I read that. Yep, so that was on page 45 in the Troubadours. Yep, so I went back a little bit further. I'm sorry, it's just been a long day and I'm tired, but oh well, I'll just finish reading this page. Anyways, the bards, they had signs, words, and secret means of knowing each other. They had a sign of distress, which compelled others of their order to come to their assistance in time of trouble. These wandering singers and storytellers played an important part in the social and ethical life of early Europe. They carried news from place to place. Needless to say, the reports which filtered through the bards took on a colorful appropriate to the problem of the moment. In this way, these poet-singers exercised a powerful religious, philosophical, and political influence. There. The machinery of the Druidic mysteries was revived by the descendants of the sons of Manes to become the mechanism behind the troubadours. Actually, there was no break between the ancient mysteries and the post-Reformation revival of arts and sciences, which made possible the modern way of life. Virgil, says W.F.C. Wigston, quote, takes up the lighted torch of Homer and hands it on to Dante, who passes it to the genius behind the Shakespeare mask, unquote. The troubadours were armed with one of the most important of all psychological formulas. If one would change the world, teach the young. They appointed themselves the tutors of chivalry and were regarded as peculiarly equipped to endow youth with an appropriate cultural viewpoint. On the surface, their approach was simple, honest, and effective, and obviously above reproach. They taught, for example, that a genteel man always mended an open seam in his garment. This is more important than to patch a hole. A hole may indicate long wear, but an open seam represents carelessness. Incidentally, these reformers were careful to prevent any open seams in their association. Another precious bit of advice was in effect, it is not important that the rich dress well, but most important that the poor dress neatly. Small means plus neatness equals character. It may be inferred by the political consequences of their activities that the troubadours did not limit themselves to a consideration of what the well-dressed young man should wear. Beneath the surface of was the doctrine of the rights of man. The order taught chivalry toward the weak. It emphasized that, listen to this, service for the common good was nature's highest calling. I have more socialist to communist literature, humanist literature that uses that very same kind of language. Servicing the common good over the individual. We went over Alice Bailey's writings, and she was saying the very same thing. And the communists used the very same language, so did the socialists and collectivists and humanists. And so this is not really rights of man. I mean, this is not really, God-given individual liberty. This is, again, a kind of a system of control with some privileges for the masses that can be taken away whenever the powers that be decide to do that. And, if we look around, there's some battles going on over that, but apparently the powers that be think that we're in that system now. So, from the troubadours came many of those glorious myths and legends of the age of chivalry. The moral fables that right always conquers and nobility of spirit is the only true nobility to which man can attain. A goodly number of our children's fairy tales were first sung by the troubadours. Sometimes the original story is much older, but these minstrels found a way to adapt the legends to their own purposes. The troubadours flourished in southern France, Italy, and northern Spain between the 11th and 14th centuries. It is now established with certainty that these men, who numbered about 400, were members of a secret mystical or philosophical fraternity dedicated to the discovery of those powers of the mind and heart which must be cultivated and disseminated before it is possible to bring about a universal reformation of mankind. What do you think he's talking about there? In his most stimulating article, Alchemy and the Holy Grail, Harold Bailey writes, quote, "Everyone has heard of the troubadours, but it is not generally realized that they were heretics under the ban of the church and driven hither and thither by that relentless antagonist. Their mission, Erox tells us, was to redress the wrongs of Rome, to take up the defense of the weak and oppressed. They were also represented and celebrated as the true soldiers of the Christ, the exponents of celestial chivalry, and the champions of the poor, attacking under all their forms the monstrous abuses of the priesthood. It is said that great numbers of the higher classes became troubadours, wandering from court to court and castle to castle, spreading the doctrine of the organization for which they were acting as emissaries. In France, the troubadours were protected by the Albigenses, for the obvious reason that both groups held the same convictions and descended from the same source. The great rituals of the troubadours were called the courts of love. Here, under the guise of a most elementary and material passion, they preached the gospel of the divine love of God for man and the human love which alone could bring the brotherhood of humanity, or the brotherhood of man. And we already went over all that. What that really means esoterically. And this is a woodcut. So, in explaining this is the from the Melopoi of Tritonius, 1507. This curious woodcut, sometimes attributed to Durer, represents the deity, surrounded by the Muses and other mythological characters. The symbolism includes all the emblems which occur a century later in connection with the Rosicrucians and the Society of the Unknown Philosophers. Anyways, moving on, page 49. The troubadours dedicated impassioned ballads to the fair lady of their hearts. Only the initiates knew that this lady was the Isis of Sais, the Sophia of the Gnosis, and the Diana of the Ephesians. The body of the learned, which formed the secret council of the order, was the custodian of an esoteric tradition that had descended from the Druidic, Egyptian, and Chaldean sages. These minstrels concealed their knowledge from the profane, not because they desired a superiority for themselves, but for the sake of self-preservation. The name troubadour means a, quote, seeker after something that is hidden, unquote. And a minstrel is a minister or religious teacher. But if the troubadours worked quietly and industriously to further their doctrines, the adversaries were no less cunning. The church and state, aware that open rebellion threatened if the troubadours were successful in setting up their great court of love, which he identifies with brackets, world democracy. World democracy. Establishing. And remember the saying, a famous communist allegedly said, because I haven't found a direct quote, but I remember hearing this, that democracy is indispensable to socialism. We're not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. Difference. You'll find that D word nowhere in our Constitution. Quietly but relentlessly tore down each structure raised by the singing sages. Talking about the church and state, which is why that's the number one enemy of the mystery schools. To preserve the status quo, the Inquisition was set up, and one by one the initiates and mains were trapped on some pretext. The real reason of their destruction was their political plotting against ecclesiastical and temporal autocracy. Once again, the sons of the widow perished at the stake or gibbet, or were broken on the rack. That is why they seek to overthrow these institutions and things, right? It is said that Dante was a troubadour, and when we examine the structure of the Divine Comedy, the conviction grows. St. Francis of Assisi is believed to have received his first inspiration to mystical devotion from the courts of love. Among other important names associated with the order are Richard the Lionhearted and the poet Petrarch. The veiled lady of the Shakespearean sonnets and Dante's Beatrice were not mortal women, but the Virgin of the world, the secret mother of the mysteries. We may suspect that Giordano Bruno, a martyr in the name of progress, knew something of these mysteries when he wrote in a letter, quote, "I am displeased with the bulk of mankind, and am enamored with one particular lady. 'Tis for her that I am free in servitude, content in pain, rich in necessity, and alive in death. 'Tis for the love of true wisdom, and by the studious admiration of this mistress, that I fatigue, that I disquiet, that I torment myself," unquote. Even the uninitiated can scarcely miss the implication. Get a drink. The names of the principal troubadours, from Guilhem IX, Count of Poitiers, to Jurat Requier, can be traced in any standard text on the subject. From the membership we gain a reasonable comprehension of the stations and abilities of these initiate poets and singers. We can also trace the survival of the order in the Minnesingers, later Meistersingers of the Rhine. The principles of the Minnesang reached Germany from Provence, one of the last strongholds of the troubadours. The Minnesingers also addressed their songs to a lady whose name must not be spoken, but in whose service the gallant knight must pine away in desperate poetic devotion. One of the greatest of the Minnesingers, Reinmar of Alsace, was called the scholastic philosopher on unhappy love. Names change, but the substance of the tradition is ever the same. The name Pleiad, from Pleiades, you hear a lot of people in the UFO conspiracy guys and stuff, the people that claim that they're a starseed or half human, half alien. You have some of these people out there, and and they'll claim that, or even abductees will say that many of the alien races come from the star system Pleiades. Anyways, the name Pleiad from the Pleiades was first bestowed in Alexandria, that Egyptian city of initiates, scholars, and libraries, upon 7 tragic poets who flourished in the 3rd century BC. Later in French literature, there is reference to the Pleiad of Charlemagne, king of the Franks, also an initiate. In the last quarter of the 16th century, the French Pleiade, maybe I should say Pleiade. It's spelled Pleiade, so Pleiade, like Pleiades minus the S. A group of 7 poets, of whom Pierre de Ronsard was the most celebrated, attempted the renovation and enlargement of language as a means of literature and art. Lord Bacon is believed to have been in contact with the French Pleiade and has been referred to as the 8th star in the constellation of the poets. Let us not deceive ourselves with the delusion that these servants of the Muses gathered by accident or appeared upon the intellectual horizon merely to glisten for a night. The Pleiadi inherited the unfinished labors of the troubadours, as these in turn were rooted in the confederation of the Orphic poets. Taliesin the Initiate. This is the one we're on. So, okay. In the days of the good King Arthur, Elphin, the son of Gwyddno, had been granted a weir, which is a fence of stakes set in a waterway to take fish. Elphin was slow of mind, and it seemed that his wit was so dull that his father could think of no other way in which the young man could make a living except by profiting from the salmon catch. When Elphin went the next day to inspect his new weir, he found a leathered bag hanging from one of the posts. Upon opening the bag, Elphin, that's Elphin, Elphin, discovered within it a living infant of wondrous beauty who had been cast up by the waters. He named the baby Taliesin, in reference to his radiant brow. Elphin did not know that the mother of Taliesin was Ceridwen, the goddess of the magic cauldron, nor did he realize that the beautiful child had no other father but itself, for it was born through sorcery and enchantment. Ceridwen was resolved to slay her own son, but when he was born, she repented of her evil intent and placed him in a stream where some stranger would find him. Much of this story is reminiscent of the legend of Moses and his ark of bulrushes. While Taliesin was still a small boy, he was brought to the palace of the king, where he could listen to the court bards and minstrels. He had already gained considerable reputation as a poet and singer, but he sat quietly in a corner. As the entertainers prepared to perform, however, he cast a spell upon them so that they could only bow before the king and make meaningless sounds. When the bards accused the child of causing a sorcery, the great king bade him come forward and explain himself and his actions. The Song of Taliesin on this occasion is one of the most remarkable poems in the philosophical literature of the world. Thus sang the bard, quote, "Primary chief bard am I to Elphin, and my original country is the region of the summer stars. Eidno and Heinen called me Myrddin, at length every being will call me Taliesin. I was with my lord in the highest sphere, on the fall of Lucifer into the depths of hell. I have borne a banner before Alexander. I know the name of the stars from north to south. I was in Canaan when Absalom was slain. I was in the court of Dawn before the birth of the Gwydion. I was in the place of the crucifixion of the merciful Son of God. I have been 3 periods in the prison of Arianrod. I have been in Asia with Noach in the ark. I have seen the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. I have been in India when Rome was built. I have now come here to the remnant of Troia. I have been with my lord in the ass's manger. I have strengthened Moses through the waters of Jordan. I have been in the firmament with Mary Magdalene." It's funny how they used to talk back then, right? "I have obtained the muse from the cauldron of Ceridwen. I shall be until the day of doom on the face of the earth, and it is not known whether my body is flesh or fish." Taliesin exists only as a name in the old history and literature of the Welsh. That is spelled, in case I didn't, I don't think I did, no. But that is spelled Taliesin. Many early songs and poems are attributed to him, but of the man himself nothing is known. It was not until the 16th century of the present era that even a mythical account of his life was compiled or invented. Of course, it is possible that early and little-known legends were drawn upon, but it is equally possible that a story was manufactured to explain the writings attributed to this elusive bard. In any case, Taliesin personifies the perfect initiate of the later Druidic mysteries. We use the word later because in most of his poems a strong Christian influence is present, He was the Christian Druid, accepting the new faith but rejecting nothing of the old. The pagan philosophers of Britain and Gaul found many parallels between their own doctrine and those imported by the Catholic priests. It was quite evident to the wise men of the oak trees that Jesus was a Druid. His life and teachings agreed exactly with the reports about their own initiates, and the first Christian missionaries were not entirely loath to capitalize upon these real or apparent similarities. As a result, it is hard to say whether the Druidic order became a pagan school of Christian mysteries or a Christian school of pagan mysteries. Interesting. The Druids believed in metempsychosis, and Taliesin sang of his previous lives upon the earth in the same verses in which he paid homage to Christ. The bards were so certain that they would be born again in the physical world that they lent money to be paid back in a future incarnation. Several such agreements are preserved in the British Museum. Pagan gods and Christian saints were honored together without the slightest hint of conflict, and such legends as those of the Holy Grail and Arthur's Round Table reveal the two systems in an indissoluble compound. Perhaps the Druid initiates knew more about esoteric Christianity than regular churchgoers of today would like to admit. These ancient philosophers were not overtly impressed by appearances, and they accepted it as a matter of course that a great religion was by necessity a science of human regeneration concealed under mystical symbols. They applied their own golden key to the keyhole of the Christian fables, and were not at all surprised to find that it fitted perfectly. It is doubtful if the missionaries of the church were as generous, and it is equally doubtful if they ever even knew what was happening. They were too busy making converts to investigate the minds and hearts of those they were converting. It is impossible to bind those who have unfolded their own eternal spiritual faculties to arbitrary limitations imposed by any formal religious system. In all faiths, those truly wise perceive universal truths, and the more philosophical a system of belief, the more useful it is in interpreting other systems that are founded upon similar principles. In his introduction to Bardus, Reverend J. Williams, Ab Ithel, quotes the following, quote, "And when we consider that the Gorsedd of the Bards was but a continuation in the wide island of the circular temples of patriarchal times, we may feel assured that it is among the ruins of Bardism, or the religious system connected with the primitive temples, we may hope to discover, if at all, that golden key, concealed and secured, which can open the mysteries or esoteric doctrine of ancient nations." Taliesin was the Welsh Orpheus, for, like the Bard of Thrace, he charmed the whole world with his songs. He even descended into the underworld, and the dark land was filled with his music. Like Tuan Mac Carroll, the old Irish initiate of County Donegal, Taliesin remembered the many incarnations through which he had passed, and he sang of the beginnings of life and the growths of men and the histories of his people because he had the memory of the long living in his own heart. According to the legends, he did not die but was again transformed. He grew old, and then he became young again, and when feebleness came upon him, he journeyed to the secret place to await the renewal of his body. And that is page 55 of the Orders of the Quest of Holy Grail. A lot of information. So, I'm looking through these books, other books from William P. Hall. This one and this one, and I have many others. Where, definitely calling for a New World Order as always, and he has some very interesting quotes in here about eugenics, sterilization of the unfit, and how he agrees with that. I'll give those quotes in my next video, but yep, so far, so great, just truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They are the true Draculas of the world, so music's fitting. So, have a good night.